repeat what you said, because the gentleman said he comes up from Eugene, typically to see things that that perhaps are a little off the beaten track. So he mentioned Nixon in China and Orfeo last year, the flip class work, and this one. And I love the fact that you said who needs to go to Seattle. So that was, although I love going to Seattle and Seattle Opera is
next year you have Galileo, so
and that'll be done here. We're doing flip class with Galileo next year at this time. But the gentleman that was referring to the orchestration. Now, both of these works are scored for huge orchestras. Interesting, you know, that Ravel writes relatively small works dramatically, but they both require an orchestra of, say, between 60 or 70 players. Now, we can only fit about 20, 25 players maximum in this pit here. So you then, as an opera company, have to do a reduced orchestration. Now, there is the orchestration for L'Heure Espagnole is about 22 players, 22 members of the orchestra. Because L'Enfant et les sortileges, just getting to your question, sir, because the second opera is still under copyright, there is only one reduced version that we can legally perform in the United States, and that's the version you heard tonight. You're right, which is much sparser. It's piano four hands, cello, and flutes. So it's essentially 3 instruments. There is an orchestration for L'Enfant et les sortileges of a similar amount of musicians, about 20 or 25 musicians, that is available to be performed in Canada, but because of copyright law, it's not available to be performed in the United States. Go figure. So that's been an enormous source of frustration. But I do appreciate your observation. You had a question?
That was kind of the same thing. I was just going to how you think the reduction of the orchestration kind of adds to the visceralness of it.
Yeah. Well, you know, on one hand, there's no question in the L'Enfant, because it's a very small orchestra, it throws that much more presence on the singing. But part of Ravel's, a key part of his genius is his orchestration. And for those of you that, you know, there are many wonderful recordings of both of these works available, and if you're new to them, I do encourage you to seek out a number of the good CDs, because to hear the full color and range and texture of the orchestration is pretty extraordinary. Yes, sir.
You said that you had staged this a number of times.
Yeah.
And I suspect that if that has happened, there's been an evolution in the staging. Would you tell us about that?
Oh, thank you. The question is, the gentleman heard me say that I staged this a number of times, and has there been an evolution in my thinking about the staging? I've only staged L'Heure Espagnole once before. I've done scenes from it, because I taught for years at various music schools. But L'Enfant et les sortileges, I've probably staged about 5 or 6 times. But only in workshop productions. In other words, I did it at Juilliard, I did it at Yale when I was teaching at Yale. I did it here at Bel Canto Northwest, the summer program here years ago. So it's only, I've never done it in a fully realized production with full sets and costumes and a full orchestra like this. But it's one of my greatest loves. It's really one of my absolute favorite operas. I would say the only thing that's evolved in my thinking about it is that I'm doing less and less with it. I find that it's a piece that you don't want to define too much of what a clock looks like, or you know, what a cat looks like, or what a teapot looks like, because I feel if it becomes over-defined, then you don't allow the audience to sort of meet you halfway and get involved on a sort of an imaginative level. So we made a very conscious choice to have light be a key part of this production. The lighting, I think, is quite beautiful, Don Crossley's lighting. And to have the costumes, which I think are beautifully designed by Sue Bondi, to suggest something about each of the characters without fully defining them. Because I felt it was important that you invite the audience to sort of partake in the journey and suggest each character. But those were the key thoughts in putting this together. Anything you guys would add to that in terms of what it's like to perform a teapot or a tree, or anything else in terms of what's challenging?
Well, I think a good example for me is I was the armchair at the very beginning. The child sat in me, and then I got up and kicked her out of the chair. And if I were just literally a chair, you know, if they bought an armchair and put a little hole for my head, I wouldn't really have much to do. But because I was just wearing a costume that had arms that looked like the arms of the chair, I had to think much more about, okay, how does an armchair move its face? How does an armchair move when it steps across the floor? And it plays more of a challenge on me as to how I evoke this object, even though I don't completely look like that object. And so I think that's a good example of how it's not only the costume designer meeting the audience halfway, but it's the costume designer meeting the performer halfway. And I think that was a very good balance for us to have.
I think we have time for one more question. Yeah, over here. I'm sorry, Steve.
These small operas can be paired with other small operas, mariachi, so Carmina Burana. Which ones do you ever pair with?
These two operas, you mean?
Yes.
Well, as I said earlier, well, the question is which other operas are these small operas usually paired with? They're not done all that often, to be perfectly honest. This is, as I said, the West Coast premiere of these two being done on the same evening. As we speak, the Juilliard School in New York is doing a double bill of L'Heure Espagnole and Puccini's Gianni Schicchi. When I was in college, the Met did a triple bill, Metropolitan Opera did a triple bill of 3 French one-acts from the same period. Parade by Eric Satie, La Mamelle de Teresa by Poulenc, and L'Enfant et les sortileges by Ravel. So I don't think there's any, it's not like Pagliacci and Cavaliere Staccana or Suor Angelica and Gianni Schicchi, you know, works that are often paired together. There's no real tradition of doing these works necessarily with another work. I just felt it was unique to do both pieces on the same evening because they're the entire operatic output of Maurice Ravel. And you know, while the two stories are very, very different, what ties them together is this incredibly inventive and mercurial and entertaining music by Ravel. That's so deeply creative. What's it like singing in both? Are there challenges? Are they different from a singing standpoint, or are they more or less the same? Yeah, let's start with Jenna.
Yeah, well, L'Heure is, what's the right term? L'Enfant is a lot more of a character style, where, you know, we all play sort of spiel roles where we are imitating something, or it's not quite as, you know, you're not using your instrument in the same way. In L'Heure, I'm using it in a much more classical sort of, you know, when I was teaching music theater kids, they'd all call it legit sort of way. So it's yeah, it's just different when you're imitating an object, or you know, and there's a lot of humor in L'Enfant too. That different kind of humor than L'Heure is a little bit more suggestive. So you don't really need to go as far vocally to get the point across. But yeah.
Just to say briefly, I think they're both ensemble pieces, but the big difference is that in L'Enfant et les sortilèges, the child is really the only character that goes on a journey of some sort and changes. And so you're just being part of this tapestry that surrounds the child, whereas in L'Heure Espagnole, there's an actual journey that your character goes on, and it's perhaps more satisfying artistically, but there's something very fun about getting to play all the different characters in L'Enfant. Cutting this off here.
Oh, we're cut off. Okay. Okay. Well, then maybe that's a cue. I'm very sorry that we're out of time, but I just do want to say that what I love about working here in Portland is that we have an audience of ladies and gentlemen like yourself that support us when we do, of course, Bohème and Butterfly and Traviata, the great masterpieces, but that actually continue to support us when we stretch the envelope a little bit with evenings, with matinees like today. And so that means the world to us. Thank you so much for being here and for your support of our company.